Story 1. First, all names in this account have been changed. I won't be giving mine, and I've altered the names of everyone involved to protect their families from harassment, speculation, and whatever else might come from this getting out. Second, and this part is important, do not come looking for me. I'm not lost. I don't need to be found. I'm serious. I don't care who you are. Law enforcement, search and rescue, curious hiker, journalist. Stay away from these woods. Consider it a warning, not a breadcrumb trail. I've been a volunteer with search and rescue for about 5 years now. In that time, I've had the honor of finding 4 lost souls. Most of them just people who wandered off trail and got turned around in the woods. But this case was different. The missing person, Kevin, was 14 years old. He'd gone hiking with his father 3 weeks ago, a 4-day trip through the backcountry. When they didn't return after 6 days, his mother reported them missing. It only took 2 days to find their camp, or what was left of it. The tent was shredded, blood everywhere, bits of hair and bone scattered among the leaves. We found the dad not too far from camp. Both arms, 1 leg and face were gone. They appear to have been chewed off. Stomach ripped open with swarms of tiny white maggots feeding on his insides, but no sign of the child. We'd been combing these woods ever since, and every day that passed made it harder to believe we'd find either of them alive. Today had been no different. We'd been hiking since 7 a.m., our legs burning, eyes scanning everywhere for a hint of movement. My partner, Charles, chewed absently on a protein bar as we went, crumbs falling into the brush. By the time the sun began to dip past the tree line, it was close to 3 p.m., and still no sign of the boy. "I really don't think we're going to find this kid," mumbled Charles, his voice muffled by the protein bar still in his mouth. "And if we do, it'll be a corpse." "Then we bring back his corpse," I snapped. "Or maybe you'd rather tell his mother, who just lost her husband, you got too tired to keep looking for her son." Charles glared at me but didn't answer. "You volunteered for this, for fuck's sake," I added, ending the argument. "I know," he muttered after a moment. "I'm just tired, man." "Yeah," I sighed. "Me too." For a while, the only sounds were our boots crunching through underbrush and the occasional crack of a branch. Then a sharp, electronic chirp broke the silence. Charles's satellite phone. He dug it out of his vest pocket, flipped it open, and swallowed the rest of his bar before speaking. "Charles with Search Team 3, go ahead." "Yeah. No, still no sign of him. We're probably about 6 hours out from the vehicles. Copy that." He clicked it off and slipped it back into his pocket with a groan and shook his head. "The other teams aren't reporting anything either," Charles grumbled. "Another bust." "Let's look for another hour or so, then head back," I told him. "Maybe we'll get lucky." I liked Charles, don't get me wrong, but his constant complaining was starting to grate on me. He was a big guy, about 6'3", broad shoulders and thick arms. Definitely handy if we ran into a bear. Still, even though I'd been doing search and rescue for 3 years longer than him, somehow he was the one who was assigned the satellite phone. The next hour passed in tense silence. The only sound was soft birdsong drifting down from above, the crunch of boots on dead leaves, and the occasional hiss of wind through the woods. Every so often, Charles would check his compass or glance at the GPS, but the signal kept flickering out. "Let's stop for a bit," he finally said, lowering his pack onto a fallen log. "My legs are about to give out." I didn't argue. I dropped my own pack beside him and sat down, stretching my aching knees. The forest around us was unnervingly still, that kind of heavy quiet where you almost feel something watching you. Charles dug through his pack, moving aside a mess of gear until he pulled out a water bottle. Among the jumble, one thing caught my eye, the bright orange barrel of a flare gun. "Since when did you get a flare gun?" I asked. "Since a week ago," he said, flashing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Figured it might come in handy." He handed me the bottle, and I took a long drink. We sat there for a couple of minutes, recharging our energy. Charles ate another protein bar, while I absent-mindedly sharpened a stick with my pocket knife. I suddenly became aware that the woods had gone dead silent. The usual background hum of wind and insects had vanished, leaving only the crunching of Charles's chewing. If not for that, I might have thought I'd gone deaf. That's when I heard a faint rustle from somewhere behind us. I froze mid-motion. Charles noticed it too. We both turned toward the sound, scanning the tree line, eyes darting between the narrow trunks. The silence stretched thin, every second feeling longer than the last. Then, from the shadows between the pines, someone staggered out into view. It was a boy, filthy, clothes torn, face pale and streaked with dirt. He stood there blinking at us, swaying slightly on his feet. "Jesus Christ," Charles breathed, already standing. "Kevin." The boy's lips moved, but no sound came out. He just stared at us, his eyes wide and glassy, like he was half asleep, or half dead. We rushed toward him, but slowed as soon as we got a better look. I thought back to the photo we were given. I'd studied it for hours, memorizing every detail until it was burned into my mind. Kevin was supposed to be a little pudgy, with shoulder-length brown hair and big, soft brown eyes. The thing standing in front of us barely resembled him at all. He was rail-thin, skin stretched tight over bone, his clothes hanging off him like they belonged to someone else. His head was completely bald, no eyebrows, no stubble, just pale, raw-looking skin. But those eyes, those brown eyes were unmistakable. "Please," he croaked, voice weak, barely audible. "I'm lost." Hey, it's okay, buddy," Charles said, dropping his pack and rummaging through it. "You're safe now. We've been looking for you for weeks. You must be starving." "Whoa." Kevin nodded, reaching out his trembling hands to take the cookie and Gatorade bottle Charles offered. He tore open the wrapper clumsily, snapping off a small piece and dropping it into his mouth. Almost immediately he began to cough, a deep, raw sound that shook his whole body. He doubled over, hacking and wheezing, his thin shoulders jerking violently. Hey, easy," I said, stepping closer. "You okay, kid?" Kevin spat into the dirt. When he looked up, tears rimmed his wide brown eyes. "It burns," he croaked. "What does?" Charles asked. "The cookie." Kevin nodded weakly. "Everything I eat hurts," he whispered, voice breaking. "But I'm so hungry." He stared down at the half-eaten cookie in his palm, as if fighting an invisible urge. His stomach growled loudly, and before either of us could stop him, he shoved the rest of the cookie into his mouth and swallowed hard, shuddering as he did. Charles and I exchanged a glance. Something was very wrong here. While Charles was calling dispatch to relay the good news, I sat with Kevin and asked him a few questions. "What happened to you at the camp?" The boy was starting into space, eyes unfocused. "I don't know. It happened. It was dark and everything happened so fast. Something pulled me out of the tent at night and bit me." "Bit you?" I said, eyebrows raised. "Where?" Kevin pulled down his shirt, reveling the wound. The bite was massive. Flesh along his shoulder had been torn open in a jagged crescent. The skin around it was bruised, with the edges already swollen and slick with dried blood. You could clearly see where upper and lower jaws had clamped down. Punctures spaced far apart, each one big enough to fit a thumb inside, and it stank faintly of rot and iron. Despite the horrific brutality of it, the bite looked old, like it had happened years ago. "Holy crap," I muttered, my voice barely more than a whisper. That's a brutal bite. A bear." Kevin shrugged, his small shoulders trembling. "I didn't see it. My dad knocked it off me, told me to run, so I ran. I ran and ran until I tripped on something. Then I was alone." His voice cracked, and I could see tears streaking the grime on his face. I put a hand on his back, trying to ground him. "It's okay, Kevin. We're getting you home. Have you found my dad?" I hesitated for a moment, not sure if I should tell him about the mauled and partially devoured body found near his camp. I didn't want to send him into shock. It could kill him. "No," I lied, "but we'll find him too," I said with a nervous, uneasy smile. Hesitantly, wanting to change the subject, I asked, "What happened to your hair?" "It fell out," he said flatly, almost like he didn't even recognize how strange it sounded. "Like my teeth." He opened his mouth and I froze. Only 6 jagged teeth remained, unevenly scattered across pale, bleeding gums. His skull seemed almost too thin beneath his skin, his eyes wide and hollow, and what should have been a face of a boy looked more like a fragment of something undead. A low, guttural cough shook his small frame as he closed his mouth. Charles joined us again, frown on his face. "We have a problem," Charles said, rubbing his neck. "We won't get a chopper out until morning. Apparently they're all tied up with other rescues." "Of course," I groaned, rolling my eyes. "So, what's the plan then?" Charles glanced at the GPS. "There's an old cabin about 20 minutes walk from here. We could crash there for the night and wait until morning." I nodded in agreement, then turned to Kevin. "You up for a little more hiking?" The boy managed a weak, toothless grin, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, but also a flicker of determination. As we moved through the woods, I couldn't help but notice something unsettling. The forest was completely silent. Normally, The trails were alive with the chirping of birds and the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, but with Kevin in tow, the world seemed to hold its breath, silent, watchful, as if forest itself was wary of him. After what felt like an eternity of trudging through mud and tangled roots, we finally came to a small clearing and spotted the cabin. The wood was grey and rotting, warped from years of neglect, and the roof sagged unevenly. Moss crept up the walls, and vines snaked through cracks in the timber. The windows were filthy, letting in thin slivers of fading light illuminated the inside. The porch groaned under our weight as we stepped onto it, loose boards threatening to snap. A faint smell of damp wood and mildew wafted out as we opened the door, and the inside was barely larger than a single room. Dust motes swirled in the air, and cobwebs hung from the low ceiling. A single rickety table leaned precariously in the corner, and an old stove stood cold against one wall, a fire poker resting against it, both rusted and unused for decades. It wasn't much, but it would do for a night, if it didn't fall apart around us first. We pulled up a couple of rickety stools and sat at the leaning table, opening a few cans of beans for a small dinner. Kevin ate slowly, each spoonful a struggle, his body trembling with every bite. Occasionally, a mouthful would set off a coughing fit that had him doubled over, hacking and sputtering, but he kept going. After supper, we tried to distract ourselves with a game of cards. The cabin creaked around us, the wind rattling the windows, but inside, for a little while, it felt calm, almost normal. Kevin's eyes still carried the weight of the last few weeks, but for a moment, we laughed softly at a botched hand or a lucky draw. The world outside, with its dangers and horrors, seemed to fade, replaced by the illumination of our flashlights and the faint scent of damp wood. "Well, that was fun," Charles said, then reached into his pack and pulled out the flare gun. He spun it playfully in his hand, grinning. "All right, gentlemen, who's up for a round of Russian roulette?" We all laughed. The tension of the day slipped away for a moment, replaced by the easy absurdity of exhaustion and bad jokes. Outside, the full moon hung high, its pale light cutting through the grime-smeared window and spilling across Kevin's back. He suddenly stopped mid-laugh, and his smile melted into a blank expression. His eyes went glassy, unfocused, the kind of stare that looked straight through you. Then he pitched forward, retching violently. The first wave hit the floor with a wet splash, splattering across his cards and the worn planks of the hut. The sour stench of half-digested beans filled the cramped space almost instantly. "Ah, shit!" I yelped, scooting back hard off the chair to avoid the spray. "You good, man?" Charles asked, his voice caught somewhere between concern and disgust, shuffling back with me. I think so," Kevin wheezed, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Not sure why that happened." He didn't finish. His chest lurched, and another violent convulsion racked his frame. The second eruption was worse than the first. His remaining teeth shot free of his mouth with the bile, bouncing and scattering across the cabin's floorboards like thrown dice. Kevin gagged, then wrenched forward again. This time it wasn't beans, but a thick, dark red spray that gushed out in a pulsing arc, splattering across the cards, pooling on the already slick floor until the whole place stank of iron and bile. And then the convulsions hit. His arms snapped tight against his chest, then flailed outward, legs kicking spasmodically as though he were a puppet jerked by tangled strings. His thin body bowed unnaturally, the sound of joints straining audible even above the sickening wet choke of his throat. The vomit stopped, but the sounds didn't. Now it was a hideous, wrenching, dry heave, each one like his body was trying to tear itself apart from the inside. A horrible rasping cough tore up with it, dry and ragged, scraping the air raw as his body seized and bucked on the blood-slick floor. With each ragged, dry heave, something pressed further out of Kevin's toothless mouth, forcing its way into the open. Then, with a rush of dread, I realized what I was seeing, the nose and muzzle of a wolf. He gagged and retched, his chest convulsing as more of it slid free, slick with blood and mucus, glistening under the lantern light in wet black flashes. At the same time, his frail frame began to swell. The vomit-soaked clothes clung for only a moment before seams split and fabric tore, the sound sharp and wet as Kevin's expanding body burst free from its restraints. The air filled with the thunder of snapping bones, cracks echoing through the room, while coarse, bristling hairs sprouted in patches across his once hairless back and arms, curling in thick tufts until his once wasted frame was shrouded in a wiry coat. His skin changed from pale to an unnatural shade of mottled purple, veins bulging like black cords beneath the surface. His fingers spasmed, curling and stretching as the bones lengthened, the nails splitting, thickening, and hardening into curved talons that scraped grooves into the wood beneath him. Charles shouted something, but the sound barely registered. The boy's body no longer looked frail, no longer human. Every convulsion brought him closer to something else, something that belonged out in the silent woods we'd been walking through. Kevin's body shuddered once more, his chest heaving with ragged, unnatural breaths, each one rattling like wind through broken glass. The thing that had forced itself from his mouth, the wet, snarling muzzle of a beast, hung there, trembling as if tasting the air. His original, human jaws remained split unnaturally wide, the angles impossible for any person, the flesh around his lips stretched white and splitting. He looked at me for a moment, pleading confused horror in those big brown eyes. Saliva and blood dripped from the new canine mouth now extended a good 6 inches from Kevin's human one, the brow of the thing slowly becoming visible. The hound's maw was snarling as it emerged with each heave, his entire body convulsed with every inhale, ribs straining with the effort. Charles and I pressed ourselves against the hut's wall, cowering like a pair of tiny rabbits trapped by a predator. I held my knife tightly with trembling hands. Charles wielded the fire poker with one hand and the flare gun in the other, both of us, eyes wide with horror. Kevin was blocking the only exit. We were trapped. I couldn't move, my legs nailed to the floor. Kevin's eyes had rolled back into nothing but milky whites, and yet tears still streaked down his cheeks, dripping into the gore below. It reached with its new hands and gripped Kevin's human upper and lower jaws. The sound was worse than the sight. A brittle crack snap as Kevin's skull split under the pressure of those monstrous claws, exposing its wolf-like ears. Bits of bone and flesh tore loose, flopping to the blood-slick floor with a sickening slap. It shook its head clean, much like a hound would. It stood there with its head bowed, supporting itself on its knuckles like a primate, breathing slowly, deep and steady. Charles and I pressed ourselves flat against the far wall, every muscle frozen, terror etched deep into our faces. I prayed, desperately, that it would leave through the door, vanish into the black woods outside, joining whatever other horrors roamed the night. Then it turned to face us, and time turned to ooze. The creature before me was a grotesque fusion of human and predator, every detail twisted into something nightmarish. Its face was elongated and wolf-like, jagged fangs coated in dark, congealed blood. Feral amber eyes sat deep in its skull, radiating a cold, calculating awareness. Coarse black hair sprouted unevenly across its scalp and face, framing the gaping maw with matted clumps, and its thin, cracked purple skin stretched taut over high cheekbones. The nose was that of a wolf, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. A bright red tongue came out to wet it. Its torso was emaciated yet unnaturally muscular, sinews flexing under its purple-grey bruised skin. Dark, wiry hair ran down its spine, curling around the shoulders and arms. The arms themselves were grotesquely long, with hands that ended in elongated fingers tipped with blackened, hooked claws. Its knuckles protruded like small jagged boulders beneath the thin skin. Its legs mirrored the arms in their monstrous distortion, thin yet strong. The feet were nightmarish hybrids, high arches, thick leathery soles, elongated toes, each tipped with wicked curved claws that had scraped and gouged the floor. Veins pulsed beneath the stretched, almost reptilian-like skin, and tufts of coarse hair sprouted along the ankles and shins, connecting to powerful, twisted thighs that seemed ready to spring at any moment. Yellow eyes fixed on us, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the stagnant air of the hut, every motion unnervingly predatory. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat deafening in the tense silence. Its upper lip curled back, exposing jagged, yellowed teeth that gleamed in the dim light of the flashlights. A low, guttural snarl rumbled from deep in its throat, a sound both animal and disturbingly human. Then it lunged. It zeroed in on Charles first, no doubt seeing the larger man as the greater threat. Charles swung the fire poker with all his strength, but the creature twisted just out of reach. Before he could recover, Kevin slammed into him like a linebacker, sending Charles crashing against the wall with a sickening thud, the flare gun flung from his hands, flying across the cabin space. I reacted instantly, swinging the knife with everything I had, striking the beast on its upper back. It let out a guttural, pained grunt, staggering for just a moment. But then it retaliated. Its massive claws shot out like jagged blades, raking across my chest with brutal force. The impact threw me backward, my body hitting the floor with a bone-jarring smack as pain seared through me. The beast lunged at Charles again, its massive bulk pinning him to the floor. Its jaws clamped down on his left shoulder with a sickening crunch. Charles screamed, thrashing wildly. He swung out desperately with the fire poker, striking Kevin in the ribs. A sharp, pained shriek echoed from the creature as it staggered back, but only briefly. Before he could recover, the beast struck with lightning speed. One of its enormous claws shot down, sinking deep into his upper stomach. Then, with horrifying ease, it dragged the claws toward itself, ripping open Charles's abdomen as effortlessly as unzipping a jacket. Blood sprayed across the floor as Charles cried out. The thing lifted its head toward the ceiling, letting out an ear-shattering cry. It wasn't a wolf's howl. No, it was something far darker. A sound like a person trying to imitate a wolf, twisted and guttural, with a bass that rattled the bones. Then, without warning, it plunged its snout into Charles's open stomach, greedily slurping and tearing at his innards. I forced myself upright, every movement sending jagged pain through my ribs. No doubt some were cracked. My eyes locked onto a nearby object, the flare gun, barely a foot away. Salvation, my only chance. Slowly, agonizingly, I inched toward it. Through my peripheral vision, I saw it twist in my direction, drawn to fresh movement, its wet breathing echoing through the hut as it fixed on me. My hands closed around the flare gun just as it pounced. Its jaws snapped toward me, aiming for my neck, dripping with blood. Instinct took over. I threw my arm up to protect my throat. The creature's teeth clamped down on my forearm with bone-crushing force. I felt a sharp crack echo through my arm as pain exploded up my shoulder. Panic surged, but there was no time to think, only to act. A burst of adrenaline shot through me. With my free arm, I aimed the flare gun at the creature's face and pulled the trigger. A blinding red light erupted from the barrel, the flare striking straight into its eye. It yelped, releasing my arm, and clawed desperately at its eye, trying to remove the burning projectile. Flames quickly caught, licking across its hairy face, turning the creature's head into a writhing fireball. Wails of pain echoed through the hut as it thrashed violently, massive claws slashing at the walls and floor as the flames consumed its head. Smoke filled the tiny room, stinging my eyes and making it hard to breathe. I stumbled backward, gripping the flare gun tighter, my ribs screaming with pain every time I moved. Its wails grew louder, a sickening mix of human and beast, echoing off the log walls. Sparks rained down around me as the fire spread, igniting the curtains and scraps of wood. The open doorway loomed ahead. It was now or never. I hobbled forward, each step an effort, and reached the threshold. My hand gripped the doorframe, and I forced myself to glance back one last time. The hut was a hellscape. Charles was on his back, dead, huge hole in his gut, face twisted in agony, gaze fixed on the now flaming roof. The wolf thing writhed on the floor, thrashing desperately, trying in vain to extinguish the fire that completely consumed it now. Its anguished howls echoed through the dark woods, a terrifying symphony of fury and pain. Smoke curled into the night air as I stepped out, gasping for fresh breath, the scent of burning hair, charred flesh, and popping fat lingering in the air. I only got a couple of feet from the cabin before I fell onto my side. I grunted in pain as I collapsed, rolling onto my back. The night sky stretched endlessly above me, the full moon hanging heavy and ominous, casting pale light over the burning structure. My vision blurred, pain radiating through my body, and slowly I felt myself slipping away. All that remained was the oppressive roar of flames and the eerie stillness of the forest beyond, pressing in from all sides as I succumbed to blissful unconsciousness. It was morning when I stirred awake. For a moment, disorientation clouded my mind. I didn't know where I was. Then reality hit me like a crashing wave. I moved slowly, expecting pain, but to my astonishment there was none. My arm, where the beast had bitten me, had a good-sized scar of bite mark, similar in shape to a dog bite, but it looked almost completely healed, as if months had passed. Tentatively, I pulled up my shredded shirt and examined the deep claw marks across my chest. Even those injuries, which I remembered as raw and agonizing, but this too looked months old. A gnawing hunger gripped me, sharper and more insistent than anything I had ever felt before. My stomach churned, aching, demanding satisfaction. I hadn't realized how ravenous I truly was until now. I forced myself to my feet and surveyed the hut. The roof had collapsed in places, walls reduced to smouldering beams, the entire structure a blackened ruin. Amazingly, the fire hadn't spread to the surrounding forest. The flames had somehow consumed themselves and died out, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. I moved cautiously toward the scorched remains, scanning for any sign of life. My gaze fell on something large sprawled among the embers. Canine jaws, now completely blackened, jutted grotesquely from a twisted body contorted in the agony of death. Smoke curled around it, carrying the acrid stench of burnt flesh, making my stomach grumble with hunger. I continued surveying the ruins when my eyes fell on another figure. Charles still lay on his back, his face completely burned away, arms resting limply at his sides. I wanted to kneel, to bury him properly, to mourn my friend, but my body's gnawing hunger forced my attention elsewhere. Survival demanded that I search for food before grieving the dead. I sifted through the debris, desperate for anything to devour, a morsel, a crumb, anything. I lifted a charred beam of wood, and beneath it, I spotted a backpack, the one that belonged to Charles. As I hoisted it up, the bag ripped open in the process, spilling its contents across the blackened floor. GPS, satellite phone, and a granola bar. Driven by hunger, ripped open the packaging on the food and shoved it into my mouth. A sharp, stabbing pain shot through my jaw. I yanked the bar free and stared in shock. 2 of my teeth were embedded in it. I lifted my hand to my mouth, feeling the gaping void where 2 upper teeth had been. My eyes widened and my pulse raced uncontrollably. I ran my fingers through my hair, trying to steady myself, and to my horror, a large clump came loose in my hand, tumbling to the scorched floor. Whatever Kevin had been inflicted with, disease, curse, I didn't know, I now felt it coursing through me. I was going to turn into a monster. My world swam. Nausea clawed at my stomach, and I bent forward, head between my knees, expecting to vomit. I evaluated my situation. I was infected. I would turn. If I got rescued, I would kill. Anyone. Everyone. Kevin hadn't recognized us when he transformed. I doubt I would be any different. I wouldn't be able to control myself. I couldn't live with the idea of hurting anyone. I pressed my palms to my face, trying to will away the inevitability. There had to be a choice, a loophole, something I could do to survive without condemning everyone around me. But there wasn't. Not anymore. I had to die. I tried taking matters into my own hands. I found my knife buried in the ruins of the hut. I hovered it over my wrists, commanding myself to slash them open, but my body just wouldn't listen. I then thought about hanging as an option, but didn't know how to tie a noose. In the distance, I heard the steady thrum of helicopter blades cutting through the morning air, a sound that made my heart race with dread. They must have followed the smoke from the hut. I couldn't be found. I wouldn't be found. Gripping the satellite phone tight in my hands, I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush as fast as my legs would carry me, deeper into the forest. Branches clawed at my arms and face, roots caught at my boots, but I didn't stop. The sound of the helicopter faded, growing fainter with every pounding step, until it was swallowed by the vast silence of the woods. After what felt like forever, 30 minutes, maybe more, I finally stopped. My chest heaved, breath rasping in my throat, sweat slicking my skin. I could still feel the faint hum of the phone in my grip. They'd trace the signal eventually, but out here, in the deep woods, they'd never be able to land. That's when I decided to type this out on the satellite phone. The connection's garbage, and pecking it out letter by letter is agonizingly slow, but it's not like I have anything better to do. I have no doubt there will be another full moon tonight, and when it rises, I'll change, just like Kevin did. What keeps gnawing at me isn't the if, but the how. Will I still be in here, reveling in the carnage I cause? Or will I be shoved into the dark, locked in the passenger seat, forced to watch through someone else's eyes as I become nothing but hunger and teeth and claws? The waiting is worse than dying. The sun is sinking behind the mountains now, dragging the light with it. Shadows creep across the trees, and with them comes the dread of inevitability. Night is coming, and with it, the change. I don't think I'll be here in the morning. The beast won't linger. It will hunt. It will wander, sniffing out fresh prey. By the time I wake again, if I wake, I'll be somewhere deep in the wilderness, covered in blood that isn't mine. Maybe, if I'm lucky, it will carry me far from anyone, far from towns, from homes, from families. Maybe the only thing it will kill tonight is me, but I doubt I'll get that lucky. Again, I want to emphasize, do not come looking for me. I'm too dangerous now. I don't want to hurt anyone, and I don't want to be found. I'm writing this so there's a record of what happened, and as a warning to anyone who might think about searching for me. Stay away. Please. If you are out here in the woods at night and you hear howling, run. Story 2. Have you ever been to a house with a personality? If you have, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, you are probably picturing one of those slightly kitsch that their owners call full of soul. But no, I mean one of those houses you can feel, you know? One of those houses you can sense in your bones even before you are in front of it. The type of house that you just know it's strange the moment you walk past it. The one that feel like there is always someone looking at you from one of the windows. That house that feels like they know you better than you know yourself. Well, let me tell you, I know one of those houses. In fact, I grew up next to one, and I feel like my whole life has always been tangled to the same cobwebs that to this day litter those old creaky rooms. Lately, I've felt it's been sort of calling me, but I find myself unable to go there, so as a strange feeling of nostalgia creeps over me, I've decided I should at least share with you some of the events that have occurred within its halls, although with some changes. I wouldn't want you people to just up and appear in my house after all. So, come closer, dear reader, and let me tell you about the house I grew up in. The house my mum and her mum before her grew up in. The house that's always been there. I feel like a good place to begin telling this story is at the beginning. Not the house's beginning, mind you. That's way before my time and thus still irrelevant to the me that lived the experience I'm about to tell. No, we will go back to my beginnings, to the first strange thing that I remember ever happening while I was visiting the house. It's got a name, by the way. Everyone I know calls it Spring House. Not because the trees around it burst into flowers come spring, though they do, but because the house was built beside a natural spring, one that seeps from a crack in the rock and winds its way downhill toward the lake. The whole house's water supply relies on that spring. The house is old like that. This story takes place during the summer holidays before I turned 7. For as long as I've been alive, Spring House has belonged to the same person, my great-aunt Gloria. But before her, it was owned by her mother, my great-grandmother Mary. She had 2 daughters and a son. The eldest inherited the house itself, while the other 2 each received a plot of land nearby. My grandparents died too young to ever enjoy the fruit trees she planted, so their inheritance skipped a generation, straight to their only daughter, my mother. Not long after I was born, she built her own place, a small cabin nestled in Spring House's shadow. And I mean that literally. There's a very specific point in autumn when the shadow of the old house comes to rest right over ours. The 2 houses are separated by a piece of land owned by another of my aunts and connected by a narrow strip of forest that runs parallel to the lake, the same lake around which my family has lived for as long as anyone remembers. Now, Spring House, as big and cozy as it can be in summer, was not usually the place where everyone gathered for family meetings. My mum had an energetic personality, and although she wasn't one of my great-aunt's own daughters, Aunt Gloria always considered her one. So, in the end, everyone ended up spending their summer afternoons in our backyard. On one of those afternoons, as my dad and uncle worked the barbecue, my great-aunt noticed she'd forgotten to bring a salad bowl. To keep the elderly woman from making the trip through the forest in the encroaching dark, my mum asked me to go fetch it. Let's just say I wasn't thrilled about going alone to the house, but I wasn't about to go against what my mum had asked. She handed me a flashlight, and off I went towards Spring House. Later, much later, my mum told me it had been a sort of rite of passage, something everyone in the family went through at some point in their youth. Everyone, eventually, had been asked to retrieve something from Spring House. Why, I couldn't tell you, especially considering how terrifying the whole thing was for little old me. Let me set the scene. The strip of trees wasn't much of a forest, but it did its job. The moment I stepped into it, the noise of my family grew muffled. A few steps more, and all sound vanished completely. From my house, if you walk directly south, you'll reach the lake. But to get to Spring House, you have to turn left at the old oak tree. It's huge, taller than any other in that patch of woods, but it's not always the tree that catches your eye. Usually, it's the figure standing beside it. Long ago, my family had been devout Catholics, though religion has slowly faded from us over the years. Still, back then, they built small grottos beside the most imposing trees, placing in each a figure of a saint. The one next to the old oak was the Virgin Mary. I walked up to it and did the sign of the cross before quickly turning left. The statue was already slightly creepy to me in broad daylight, but under the faint light of the shitty flashlight I had been given, a common thing in the early 2000s, it was outright terrifying. I wasn't Catholic, but traditions were hard to kill, and I had been taught to do the same whenever I walked past one of the figures since I was little. Even my 31-year-old self still does it from time to time. I walked up to the statue and made the sign of the cross before quickly turning left. The figure was already a bit creepy to me in broad daylight, but under the faint light of the crappy flashlight I'd been given, a common thing in the early 2000s, it was outright terrifying. I wasn't Catholic, but traditions are hard to kill. I'd been taught to do the same whenever I passed one of the figures since I was little. Even my 31-year-old self still does it sometimes, almost out of muscle memory. I walked in silence along the forest trail, a path carved by hundreds of feet that had walked it before me. The only sound, apart from the leaves crunching under my sneakers, was the steady rustling of branches swaying in the wind that blew from the lake to my right. The trek wasn't long, but to 6-year-old me, it somehow felt shorter, mostly because I dreaded what came next. The closer you got to Springhouse, the more you began to notice two things. The first was that the trees grew thinner and farther apart, as if they didn't like standing under the house's gaze. The second was the music. My great-uncle, Aunt Gloria's husband, had been an engineer. He always said the house was too big for comfort. If something happened to someone at one end, nobody would hear their screams from the other. To fix that, he built a system of intercoms throughout the house. You could talk from one room to another, as if the walls themselves were connected by nerves. He also built a small radio in the main hall, built it from scraps and car parts, and kept it tuned to the tangos he loved so much. Later, he rigged a small speaker outside, so the beachgoers by the lake could listen too. It didn't take long for every part of the system to go haywire. "The house seems to dislike technology," he used to say, half in jest, half not. As you stepped out of the forest, you could hear the music leaking from the broken speaker, the sound warped and watery. Throughout my short life, I saw my great-uncle replace that damn thing 4 times before giving up entirely. The tangos took on an eerie tone through the distortion, slow, gurgling, like music played underwater. And then, you saw the house. Springhouse is a 2-story house built in the shape of an L, the longer arm facing the lake like it's keeping watch. In that face of the house were 14 windows and a porch where the entrance was. Given how tall each plant was, and the fact that the house had been built on top of an equally tall foundation to avoid flooding when the lake grew during winter, the house seemed to always be looking down on the people walking in front of it. And on that specific night, it felt like that wasn't just a feeling. I've always dreaded looking up towards those windows. I just knew, and I'm sure some of you will understand, I just knew that someday I would look up and it wouldn't be just empty windows looking back. I walked down the path and up the stone staircase towards the closed door of the porch. The warbled sound of the messed-up speaker was slowly overpowered by the sound of the main radio. A song I knew well was playing. It was my uncle's favorite. "Adios muchachos, compañeros de mi vida," sang Carlos Gardel in his characteristic voice while saying goodbye to his old friends. Foreboding, I know. The hall was big, the ceiling was very tall at around 5 meters, but other than the many paintings done by some forgotten great-grand-aunts and a small library filled with books, the biggest set piece was the large chandelier hanging in the middle, a big, lifelike figure of a bat looking down at me from atop the main lamp. What compelled my ancestors to hang a lamp like that was and still is beyond my comprehension. To this day it feels strange to walk beneath the ever-twisting bat which, by some sort of unknown force, always seems to turn the right way to look at you when you try looking at it. I walked to the opposite side of the room, on the tall doorway next to the staircase that would take you to the upstairs bedrooms, going out that way into the inner porch and then entering through the door. To the right at the other side would be the fastest way to get to the kitchen, but to my little heart's dismay, I found it closed. Of course, my great-aunt wouldn't just leave the door to a century-old house open for someone to just come in and take whatever they wanted while she feasted on some barbecue pork. I stood there for a second, unsure of what to do. It wasn't that I didn't know another way to get to the kitchen, which was at the end of the small arm of the L, but I would have to take the long way there, and that meant going through more badly illuminated rooms. All the while, Adios Muchachos played in the background. Wandering alone in that house wasn't my favorite way to spend my night back then, and it still isn't. I thought of just going back, telling my mum I hadn't found the bowl of salad. I knew she wouldn't say anything. She knew I wasn't a fan of Springhouse. But my older cousins were there, and there was no way in hell I was showing any kind of weakness to those assholes. I grabbed my flashlight. It felt way too heavy in my infantile hands, and I walked back to the middle of the room. Instead of going through the door opposite to the porch, I would have to go through the door to the right of the hall. The door was heavy. I made a mental note to tell my great-uncle to oil the hinges, though I knew it would make him feel guilty. He always said he felt like he was fighting a losing battle against the house. Every time he fixed one thing, two others broke somewhere else. I entered the dark room and twisted the light switch at the left side of the door. I could barely reach it, and the dim orange light, the one light bulb hanging in the middle of the tall roof, didn't do much to dissuade my fears. But at least it wasn't pitch black now. Are there even light switches that you have to twist nowadays? These shitty old things always felt awkward to use, like they had a very specific point they wanted you to reach by twisting them if you wanted to turn on the lights. And they had the bad habit of untwisting themselves after a while, so if I wanted to come back to a still-lit room, I knew I would have to move quickly. I half ran across the room, the barely used main dining room that housed the only functioning table in, Springhouse that didn't feel like they had been through a war, and pushed on the door at the other side, moving into the following room. The game room wasn't original to the house. It was the only modification my great-uncle had managed to do to the house that had stuck. In the middle of what used to be a guest bedroom filled with bunk beds, or so I had heard, stood a large pool table. All around the room were cozy sofas and armchairs, and a slightly dusty dartboard hung by the only other door in that room, my next objective. After exiting this room, only two more rooms separated me from the hallway that ended in the kitchen. Before going through the slightly ajar door, I remembered to twist the light switch. The game room was the one of only two rooms in Springhouse's first floor that didn't fill me with dread, but I still wouldn't want to come back to it completely unlit. I entered the next room and tried the switch, but no matter how many times I tried, I was completely unable to turn on the light, which wasn't completely unexpected. This one room was probably the one I dreaded the most, which in turn was probably messing up my ability to manage the switches. I stepped further into the daily dining room. Have you ever been in a ship at sea? I had never been in one, but I always guessed that room felt exactly like one. The house was old, and during its time it had survived several earthquakes that had managed to level a lot of other old houses, but Springhouse had survived almost unscathed. Almost. Over the years, the house had settled, moving on its own foundations and twisting in unexpected ways. This room, while staying completely functional, had managed to somehow feel like the ways deep at sea. The aquamarine paint in its walls and the fishing nets hung from the walls didn't help to ease the feeling either. I clung onto my flashlight as I stepped further away from the light pouring out of the game room. I didn't stop to look at the sea glass sitting on the side table or at the totally normal paintings that looked incredibly creepy in the dim light that managed to enter the room. I just sprinted through the only other door in the room, the one that would take me to the cup room, the last room before entering Springhouse's east wing. The cup room was small. The ceiling fell dramatically as you entered the east wing, which, in past times, had been Springhouse's workers' quarters. The light was, thankfully, on as I entered. I turned right and walked to the open doorway to the east hallway. At its end, I could see the door I was looking for, the kitchen's faint light illuminating my objective. As I walked towards the hallway, I walked past the room's main attraction, a large piece of furniture filled to the brim with mismatched cups, a collection that had been building for as long as the house had existed. Some, my great-aunt would say sometimes, were apparently even older than the house itself. I was sure I could hear the glasses clink as I moved past them, but in my excitement from finally reaching my goal, I decided to just ignore it. I ran to the kitchen, sprinting past the workers' dining room, the large pantry filled with things I didn't feel like eating, the room my uncle used for his tools, and the one my aunt used for the laundry. I didn't have to look hard to find the bowl of salad, that damned bowl of salad. I took the bowl in my arms and spun around quickly. I was sure as fuck I wasn't staying one more second in Springhouse that night. I hastily undid my steps and walked to the cup room and into the daily dining room. I had been too much in a hurry to notice that I had forgotten my flashlight at the kitchen when I took the salad bowl, and I didn't realize my mistake until I heard the door creak behind me, clicking closed. And just like that, I was plunged into a darkness barely broken by the moonlight entering through the blue glass windows. The door to my right, the one leading to the game room, had either closed after I exited the room, or the lights had turned off. Either way, everything was eerily quiet and dark inside the dining room. Yes, quiet. It was just then that I asked myself something I had been ignoring. When had the music stopped playing? I felt my heartbeat quicken as a shiver ran up my spine. I turned around and tried opening the door. Maybe I could just go out through the cup room and just walk around the house. I didn't like the idea of walking past all those empty windows at night, but at least outside there was moonlight. But I didn't even get to make a choice. The door that I had just walked through was locked tight. That's when I heard a very familiar noise reach my ears. I say familiar because I was used to listening to it, but in that specific context, it did nothing to quell my fears. Through the intercoms, I could hear the faint yet distinct sound of a piano, and someone humming a tune to its tune. Caballito Blanco, llévame de aquí, sang a voice that was completely alien to my ears. Llévame a mi pueblo donde yo nací. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stood there, too scared to even turn around. I was pretty sure the voice wasn't coming from the speakers, but from somewhere in the dining room. Levántate, Juana, the voice said closer than before. Y prende la vela, anda a ver quién anda. I felt something rest on my left shoulder. En la cabecera, I heard the voice whisper, right in my left ear. My mum would later tell the tale of my scream, which apparently was heard not only all the way back in my house, but was also heard by some other uncle that lived across from the highway and up in the hills. I don't remember much other than, after trying to open the door again, which I had been doing through the whole fucking ordeal to no avail, it finally opened and I sprinted like a madman carrying a bowl of salad all the way back to my house. After my mom had managed to calm me down a bit, she asked me what had happened. Between sobs, I managed to tell everyone what had happened. I half expected my cousins to laugh at me for crying, but I remember none of them did. "Oh, that's Aunt Martha," said my great-aunt as if speaking of something as obvious as water. She did always like to scare kids that walked around Springhouse past their bedtime. After that whole thing, I refused to step into Springhouse alone for a full year, not even during daytime. Story 3. I do highway work, not the glamorous kind with orange vests and TV helicopters circling while we pour a new overpass. My company leases data from the reflector posts and mile marker cams, those tiny solar nubs that blink at you in the dark like an insect cluster. My job is making sure they're alive and talking, swapping batteries, scraping winter salt off lenses, logging anything that looks off. It's a lot of night driving, a lot of shoulders, rumble strips, wind that smells like damp pennies. You start to notice patterns doing that. Which ramps fill fastest when a football game ends, which rest areas always have one bathroom closed, which motel lots are graveyards for single headlight sedans, and you notice the bulletin boards. They were what got me thinking a few months back, when the air still had that late spring bite. At a gas station in western Pennsylvania, there were 3 missing flyers with fresh staples. I pumped gas, skimmed them. One guy was a contractor, last seen near a state route. No body, no vehicle. A woman in scrubs who never made it to her night shift. A college kid whose mum wrote on the bottom in pen, "Please call your mother." 2 weeks later, I was in southern Ohio, different interstate, different vendors, but the same faces had cousins. A delivery driver, last ping near a construction zone. A teacher who never came out of a toll plaza bathroom. New, you could tell, because paper curls a certain way when it's been rained on, and these still had fight in them. By July, my roots stretched into West Virginia and Kentucky. The boards were heavier. If you stared long enough, you could play connect the dots with counties and see a slow wave of absence moving east to west along the blue lines. None of them said foul play suspected, not in those words. But there's a way a trooper writes, "If you have any information, that means we don't have a damn thing." Loners go missing. Drunks stumble into culverts. A lot of explanations work even when they shouldn't. I didn't think about it more than you would, except at a truck stop outside of Huntington, where an old guy with a hard hat and a ring of nicotine on his first 2 fingers saw me replacing a reflector battery and struck up a conversation. "You keep to the center when you drive the night," he said, like it was advice passed down from a grandfather. "Left lane, where the seams don't line up so good." I made a polite noise. "Yeah?" "Seams," he said, squinting toward the black shoulders beyond the floodlights. "Where the lanes got cut and relaid, where the guardrail sections meet. Things that, like the seams, look for the slow ones on the edges. It's truer the closer you get to the state line." "Truer how?" He tapped ash into the wind. You'll hear it before you see it. Sounds like someone rolling their knuckles down a stovepipe. He smiled in that way you don't want a stranger to smile and went inside. He didn't come back out while I finished. I didn't make a connection until 3 nights later, because you never do until the bad thing starts touching the good parts of your routine. A camera near mile 118 on I-64 had been sending gibberish. I took the shoulder, hazards ticking, and parked half on gravel, half in weedy asphalt where a previous patch had sunk. The night felt sullen, high overcast. A lot of light bounced from the interstate, but not a star in sight. My phone had one bar that flickered like a tired eye. The camera wasn't dead, it was blind. It pointed at the eastbound lanes and recorded frames that looked like someone had pressed a wet thumb into the lens and dragged. Streaks, blur. Fine, I thought. Condensation. I popped the housing, wiped. It fogged again instantly, like the lens itself was sweating from the inside. While I was sealing it, the sound came, a soft, patient rattle from the guardrail just down the slope, rung to rung, traveling toward me. A sound like a coin rolling across ridged metal. It paused when I paused. It moved when my hands moved. "Hello," I called. Dumb, I know, but people walk out here, people hide. There's a look some drivers get, the kind that means they've been in the cab too long with the engine humming through their bones, and now they want to talk to anyone about anything. I've heard confessions in diesel breath I wouldn't tell a priest. No answer. The rattle didn't stop. I stood still until my ears filled with blood. When I took one step toward the rail, it took one step back. Not footsteps, not exactly, just a shift. Like whatever balanced itself on the thin seam where one panel met the next, didn't want to test my weight. The wind moved and brought me a smell I don't have a good word for. Salt, sure, but not ocean. Old tape, bandages that have been on too long. If you've ever pulled a sunburn in one piece and felt the sting where it parted, that smell. The rattle ticked 3 times and went away. I told myself raccoon. They use guardrails like highways. I finished, logged, drove on. The coin rattle chased my car for 2 miles in fits, like a dog deciding whether to keep the game going, and then dropped away. The next week I got assigned a cross-state sprint, hit 5 dead units between Charleston and Lexington, stop overnight at a motel with a manager who owed my boss a favor, finish up before noon. I didn't want to go back out that way. I went anyway. I needed the hours. You know those old motels with doors that face the lot and a neon sign that worked better when cigarettes were cheap? This one had added a second story in the 90s and then regretted it. The lobby smelled like powdered coffee and lemon cleanser. The woman at the desk gave me a key that had 23 scratched into the plastic with a knife, like she'd replaced the original and didn't care. When I asked about food, she said the machine in the laundry had microwavable burritos. She looked at my vest and said, "If you gotta leave before 4, use the side door, front lock's stick." "You get a lot of highway guys?" I asked. "People pass through," she said, and didn't mean me. My room had wallpaper that probably started life as cream and had drifted toward a color somewhere between mayonnaise and old bone. A TV that showed local news through a halo of static. When I put my bag on the bed, the mattress sighed like it had had enough of everyone. I'm not precious. I've slept on worse. I showered, propped the chair under the doorknob, and tried to convince my brain that a night with a door you can see is better than one with a hallway. I left the TV on for company. The meteorologist was smiling too wide about a cold front that was really just another name for rain. Between the weather and the public interest segment about a canned food drive, there was a crawl that caught my eye. Authorities continue to search for local teacher last seen exiting the eastbound toll plaza at... The ticker stuttered, reset, and when it reappeared, it was about a county fair. The static wasn't consistent. It blushed and faded like the signal had to breathe. When commercials came on, the sound dipped low enough that I could hear the quieter sounds in the room. The hum of the mini-fridge, a neighbor's phone alarm chirping, and a thread of noise I first mistook for water in pipes. It wasn't. It was that rattle, softer here, coming from inside the walls, a hand traveling along a coat hanger, a spine flexing in a drawer. No, I thought. Number. The walls were nothing, a metal grid, a bit of insulation, thin gypsum. Any noise from the lot would crawl through easy. But the pattern was wrong. It wasn't aimless. It traced the seams. I stood, put my palm to the join where one strip of wallpaper met the next, and the sound came to meet it from the other side. The paper was sticky in spots, like the paste underneath had never fully set. When I leaned and looked close, I realized the pattern printed on it, stately vines and medallions, had been interrupted here and there by faint lines made with a fingernail. Straight lines, inch long, grouped in threes. Surveyor's hash marks, mile markers. The grooves darkened toward the floor. At the baseboard, someone had tried to peel the wallpaper up. It had come away in a narrow tongue, then stopped, as if whoever was doing it had hit something they didn't want to see. I didn't sleep. I lay with my shoes on and watched the door and watched the seam where the wallpaper ended at the closet door jamb. It's a stupid thing to be afraid of the point where two things meet. But once you hear the word seam said like a warning, you can't stop seeing them. The place where the carpet edge tucks under the threshold, the slit where the mattress doesn't quite kiss the wall, the V of shadow where the bathroom tile ends and the tub begins. It makes the world look unfinished, or like it's always waiting for something to slide between the pieces. At 3:12 a.m., because my eyes were doing that thing where they skimmed the red digits every minute, the rattle intensified. It rippled along the baseboard and up the closet casing. The little door labeled LINEN trembled. I'd noticed it earlier and ignored it. It wasn't a door so much as a panel, one of those maintenance chases that motel builders pretend is quaint. The handle was a simple circle of metal, cold when I touched it. I can't tell you why I did. Curiosity, stupidity, maybe because anything behind a door feels knowable. It opened 3 inches and coughed out air that smelled like tarps and wet wool. The rattle came from below, as if there were a vertical shaft full of hanging metal that someone was easing a hand down. I put my ear to the black gap. Bad idea, I know. The cold on my temple made my headache bloom bright. The sound was louder here, and underneath it, like a whisper pushed through teeth, I heard something say, "On the line." I shut the panel. I pushed the chair harder against the doorknob. I stared at the ceiling until the light outside the blinds turned from orange to grey. Dawn makes fools of a lot of things. The wallpaper looked like wallpaper again. The seam marks could have been anything. The TV turned itself off because the cable box had given up trying. I was gone by 6, forgetting the coffee, forgetting to tell the desk clerk that her panel had a voice. I told myself not to drive like a scared animal. Scared ones make mistakes, but the road didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a conveyor. The sound met me 3 miles west. My lane rose and fell in that shallow swell you get near bridges, and the guardrail started its song. The coin rattle, rung to rung. I moved left. It moved too. I slowed. It slowed. My phone had full bars and I could have called someone. My boss, a trooper, anyone. But what would I say? There's a noise following my seam. When the figure stepped out, it did it without drama, which made it worse. No lunge, no sprint, just one long step out of the place where 2 panels met, like it had been waiting with 1 foot tucked into the crack. It put that foot onto the shoulder, then the other, and began to walk the paint line with an attention that made my mouth go dry. It wasn't tall. It wasn't short. If I had to swear, I'd say it was the exact average height of every missing person poster I'd scanned over the last 2 months. It moved like a marionette whose master was careful and precise. Its head was tilted slightly sideways, the way animals listen to underground rivers. It wore nothing I recognized as clothing. That makes it sound naked. It wasn't. It was finished. That's the wrong word, but it's the one my brain chose. Finished out, like a room with the drywall up and the corners taped. Its surface was matte and pale, tight over angles that were exactly where angles should go. Not muscle, not fat. Just the suggestion of a man with all the steps between scaffolding and paint left out, and stitched where you'd expect seams, along the sides of the arms, the outer legs, the line of the jaw, not with black thread, with something the color of old tendon, not sloppy, not Frankenstein knots, neat. A tailor had worked. You want a face, I know. That's what people always ask. I wish I could give you a face so you could say, it looked like, and slot it into your idea of how fear should be. It didn't have one. Not the way you mean. There was a place where the face should be, and it was finished like the rest of it. Smooth, pale. If it turned just so, I could see depth under there, like fabric with a handprint pressed against it from the other side. My hazard lights ticked absurdly loud. The figure matched my speed easily without hurrying. When its foot hit the rumble strip, it shivered like a plucked string and stepped back to the smooth. It kept its attention on me. When I passed a mile marker, the numbers stuttered in my peripheral vision and reset in the rear view like the road was skipping frames. I don't know why I thought of the old guy and his advice. I slid farther left until my wheels kissed the dotted line. The figure leaned, considering. The center of the road has fewer seams. 18-wheelers carve it smooth with their habits. The rattle of the guardrail softened when I moved away from it. The thing kept pace for a quarter-mile, then slowed, like a fisherman letting a fish run against a drag. At the next exit, the sign for a toll plaza flashed 2 miles. Those places blaze. Sodium lamps, fluorescents, all the old light that makes a night feel like a doctor's office. If you've ever felt safe in a toll plaza, it's because something in you believes monsters don't like bureaucracy. I aimed for the plaza, breathing hard, knuckles slick. Behind me, the figure came off the shoulder and began walking the narrow seam between the slow lane and the line where the asphalt met the concrete of the ramp. It ran a hand, not fingers, a hand, because the pressure was flat, like a palm, along the seam as if reading it. The sound it made was identical to my motel wall, 1,000 coat hangers singing. The closer we got to the floodwash of the plaza, the more it hesitated. The stitches along its jaw stood out, the surface of its skin rippled in faint, nauseous waves. Half the lights in the plaza were dead. They'd set up new LED housings, and the old sodium stuttered in long lines, making a shutter-speed world. Every time the row over my head went dark for a heartbeat, the figure leapt closer without moving, not with steps, with placement. My eyes tried to mark it and failed. It was simply more where it hadn't been, like it had slipped through the blink between frames. I took a lane with a human attendant. She was drinking coffee, arm out the window, nails painted a brave red. She looked at me like I'd arrived with 3 flat tires. "You okay, honey?" "There's someone," I started and stopped, because the words had too many chances to be wrong. "Do you have a door I can pull into?" "A bay? Light?" "You need a rest?" she asked, slow, cautious. Behind me the rattle rose and the window glass beside my ear flexed. I ripped a 5 off by accident, hands shaking, and handed her 2 crumpled bills and a handful of coins, because I couldn't untangle change math in that moment. She opened her mouth to say something nice about overpaying. The floodlight over our lane blinked. I saw it there, between us, not touching her, not touching me. In the seam where the bulletproof glass met the frame, its palm flattened, feeling for entry like a blind person learns a face. The surface of the glass clouded with its breath, except breath is warm, and this was cold. When the light came back, it had moved its hand to the seam where my windshield met the pillar. My own face pulsed ghostly in the glass, and for a heartbeat there was another behind mine, pressed up, not matching. "Go," the attendant said. She didn't look at the glass. She looked at me the way you look at a dog with its hackles up. "Left. There's a maintenance bay. I'll call someone." I gunned it across the lane, ignoring that my barrier arm hadn't fully lifted. It slapped the bed of my truck and cracked. The bay was a rectangle of cruelty-bright light and polished concrete floors. There were coils of hose, aluminum ladders, cabinets with stenciled words, absorbent, spill, SALT. When I pulled in, the sound changed. The rattle went to a low hiss, like someone sucking a cut. I stopped and sat and listened to the world not ending for a full minute. Then 2. The attendant came around, her red nails steady on her coffee cup. "You want me to call a trooper?" she asked. What would I tell them? She nodded like she'd been waiting for me to ask that. "That you got tired on the road and spooked yourself," she said. "They'll give you a lecture and a pamphlet." "In your lane," I said. "The light." "Been doing that," she said. "We're working on it." "I think it likes—" I started. I didn't know how to finish the sentence without sounding like I'd soaked my brain in old wives' tales. "The seams," I said finally, "where things meet." "Road's nothing but seams," she said, "even the good ones. You should sit until the sun's up." I sat. I sipped her coffee because she put it in my hand, and it made me feel less like I'd been peeled open. When day broke, the plaza looked like any other. Men in ill-fitting polos using cones like they were chess pieces, a state truck humming, a woman in an SUV yelling because coins were no longer accepted. The place where the glass met the frame in her booth had fogged and dried in long, narrow ovals, like fingerprints that had been thinking about being fingerprints and changed their mind. I finished my jobs with a nervous efficiency. At each camera box, I stood with my boots angled so the soles straddled asphalt and grass. I didn't step on drain grates. I didn't let my pants hem brush the line where tar snakes had been poured into cracks. It's hard to live like you're allergic to joins. The world is held together by them. You want to ask, did it follow me? Of course it did. Not with a car chase, not with a movie monster sprint. In the weeks after, I'd be in my apartment and hear the heat come on and swear underneath the metal duct ping there was a memory of knuckles on rails. I went to brush my teeth and the seam where the counter met the backsplash had a blister, like something trying to breathe through latex. I had a scar on my knee from a childhood bike wreck that had been nothing to me for 20 years, and it itched deep. Not in the skin, but in the idea of skin, like a zipper I couldn't see had twitched. I started driving different roads, state routes with more pothole than asphalt. I told myself I was saving time by avoiding tolls. I stopped staying in motels with wallpaper. I taped shut the little maintenance panel in the only one that had it, and when the clerk complained, I paid the fee and left without arguing. The boards at gas stations still had new faces. The wave of absence had rolled farther west. A man in Missouri, a girl in Illinois whose father wrote, "You can have the car, just come home." The staples glittered. There is a particular kind of hope in a staple. If you look at it right, the belief that fastening something will hold the world together. I don't have answers for you. I don't know if what I saw is the skinned man people write about when they get brave after midnight, or if that thing is just the shape fear takes on the interstate because we've built our lives out of pieces and we know, deep down, that anything made of pieces can be taken apart. I know this. When you drive at night, keep to the center if you can. If something in the corner of your eye seems to match your speed without moving, don't blink between light pools more than you have to. Don't run your fingers along the seams of things absent-mindedly. Some things learn by touch. And if you hear a rattle like a coin rolling down a metal rail, patient, steady, curious, don't go to the shoulder. Don't lean over the edge of the world we've fitted together and listen to what lives between it. It already knows your route. It's been counting the miles. It only needs you to stop. Upvote 9. Downvote 0. Go to comments. Share. Story 4. I'm not sure where else to turn, so here it goes. I'm hoping someone on here has experience with uncontrollable laughing, because this is torture. My body aches. My head's pounding from dehydration. My throat's so raw it started bleeding and I've cracked several ribs. I called 911, but they think it's a prank. It started 5 days ago. My partner Kate and I pulled up to our last liquor store of the day before our shift ended. We work in alcohol beverage control, and while it's technically a law enforcement job and we carry weapons, I had never once in 12 years discharged my gun outside of a range, until 5 days ago. It should have been a run-of-the-mill license check to make sure the store wasn't selling anything they weren't legally allowed to sell. I sensed something was off immediately. The Mexican lunch special I'd eaten a few hours earlier felt like it was staging a revolt in my stomach. We heard shouting as soon as we stepped out of the vehicle. "Should I call it in?" Kate asked. I shook my head, wanting to gauge the situation first. Fights are common enough in liquor stores, but it took a moment to figure out what was off about this one. Only one person was shouting, the other person was laughing. The sun was still bright enough overhead that I could only see reflections in the windows, but when I stepped into the shade of an old oak, the picture inside became clear. The laughing was coming from a man in a hoodie. He clutched his ribs with one hand, the other aiming what appeared to be a gun at the clerk. "Gun!" I hissed. "Call it!" Kate rushed to the car to radio for backup as I stooped lower, tasting acid and chimichanga as I crouched and crept closer. It wasn't the situation that made me nauseous. It was the laugh. Even muffled through the door, it sounded unhinged. I could hear Kate on the radio, informing units in the area of a suspected armed robbery. The glint of the sunshine off the vehicle's window must have caught the guy's attention, because he turned and looked outside. Aside from the patchy beard that was starting to fill in with stubble, the guy was a clean-cut white guy with blonde hair in his late 20s. It was hard to tell through the laughter, but he looked relieved, like he was glad we'd shown up. He made for the exit. Kate returned to my side, gun drawn as well, just as the guy stepped out. Without the glass buffer, it was so much worse. His mouth hung open like a scream frozen in time. Tears streamed down his cheeks from eyes crimson with burst blood vessels. His skin looked sunburned, it was so red from the strain. And that laugh, not the way a drunk laughs, more like a dying clown's giggle. It was shrill and wheezy, broken only by raspy gasps for breath. "Drop the weapon!" I yelled. He tilted his head like he couldn't quite pass what I'd said. Kate whispered, "This is wrong. This is all wrong." And it was. Nothing about the man suggested he was a killer, but the most dangerous people you ever encounter tend to be desperate, and this man was that in spades. He marched towards us, ignoring our orders to get down on the ground. Even in that moment, The thought crossed my mind. I don't want this weighing on Kate's conscience, so when the man raised his gun, I didn't hesitate. Everything went quiet except for the sound of my firearm. Before his body even hit the ground, something wriggled deep inside me, crawling up my throat until it forced its way out. The sick feeling from hearing the man's laugh was only cousin to the disgust and self-loathing that surged in my chest. I giggled, an almost silly, light-headed laugh, like something popped open in my chest, releasing a burst of joy at the gruesome scene in front of me. I clamped my hand over my mouth, but it was too late to stuff it back down. Kate looked at me in horror. I regained my composure, but I could sense another wave coming on. "Needs a moment," I mumbled as I shuffled over to the vehicle and climbed in. I cackled for 5 minutes straight before the feeling finally passed. By that point, backup had arrived, and I knew from the way she never took her eyes off me as she told the other officers what happened, that Kate was telling them everything. Which was probably for the best, since I couldn't get 2 words out about the incident without giggling. At first it was only around others, then it happened whenever I thought of him. His blue eyes made even bluer by the bright red of burst blood vessels surrounding his irises. What was that look? I'd wondered at first. By day 2 I knew what it was. Terror and self-loathing mixed with pleading, begging for someone to make it stop by any means necessary. The department put me on leave. It's standard after an event ends in death, but I could sense they had no plan to bring me back, even if internal affairs later determined the shooting was justified and followed procedure. The psychiatrist they sent me to was sympathetic at first. "Odd reactions to trauma are common," she said when I arrived for our first session, clearly having been informed of the circumstances. "What do you see when the reactions occur?" "His body," I said, dreading the laugh building inside me. "His eyes." I howled for 30 minutes straight like I'd just heard the funniest thing in the world. The psychiatrist didn't bother asking more questions or scheduling a follow-up. The initial compassion in her voice had disappeared as she told me she was referring me to someone more equipped to treat me and prescribe me something to calm what she described as trauma-induced euphoria. The pills helped to suppress the laughs at first, so long as I could go without speaking, which wasn't hard to do since no one I reached out to from work wanted anything to do with me. Even Kate had turned, though I think it was more out of the discomfort and the trauma of reliving the shooting than true disgust for me like everyone else. She seemed reluctant to buy into my theories of contagious laughter, but she did tell me the man's name, which was enough for me to track down an address. On day 3 I knocked on his door. His wife opened it, eyes hollowed and puffy from grief. She had no clue who I was until I tried to speak and could only let out a weak giggle. "You're the one who did it then," she said. I hung my head in shame, unsure why I was even here or what she could possibly do to help. I felt selfish, like I was burdening someone to ease my own guilt, but I didn't know where else to go. "Come in," she said. I sat in her living room, silent, as she told me what she knew. About 5 days before he died, her husband came home from the bar at 4 a.m. The next morning she was pissed he'd driven and wondered why it took him 2 hours to get home after closing if they only lived 15 minutes away. When he tried to explain, he started laughing. "He had to write it down," she said. "That was the only way he could tell me." She handed me the piece of paper. The writing was shaky. Clearly he'd laughed his whole way through the note, but it was legible. "I hit someone with my car, but it wasn't my fault. I wasn't even drunk. He ran out of nowhere like he wanted to die. I don't know why this is happening. I kicked him out. I didn't believe him. Who would? The way he was acting. It felt like the most fucked up way to lie about cheating on your wife." She lit a cigarette and took a long drag before continuing. "I only spoke to him once more after. He called me from some cheap motel he was staying at. By that point I'd seen the news about a hit and run and knew he was telling the truth about that part." She barely noticed as ash fell to the floor. "He said it was a virus, or a curse. He couldn't say much beyond that. Just started laughing again. Honestly, I figured he'd completely lost it until you showed up with the same thing. I didn't help him, left him to deal with it alone." She let out a soft laugh, then looked embarrassed, like it was an unfair gesture to make in front of me. "I just told him to turn himself in. I guess he did in a way." I tried to ask a question but could only laugh. She handed me a pad and pen. "What motel?" I wrote. "The one off 11 near the truck stop." I nodded my thanks. "Sorry," I wrote. "Me too," she said. "Sure." I'd already run out of pills by the time I got to the motel. That much in such a short time span should have killed me, but somehow I felt nothing except the discomfort of laughing steadily again. Jesus, another one of you, the manager said as I entered. You're with some kind of weird circus or something? I suppressed the laughs as best I could as I wrote out my request to see the room the man I killed had stayed in. The manager agreed so long as I paid the overdue bill. I did, and he gave me a key. Inside the room there were pages scattered everywhere. He'd written non-stop, chasing down every connection he could find, trying to make sense of it just as I was. He'd taped news clippings to the wall of 3 deaths prior to his own. The man he'd hit had been hiding after accidentally killing someone in a fistfight. That person had been involved in what was supposedly a deadly domestic dispute. 3 dead bodies plus his now, and probably a lot more if you could follow the chain back far enough. He'd even tried to end it without passing it on. If he couldn't save himself, maybe he could save the next person. But his notes describe various failed attempts. The noose broke, the gun jammed, the pills came back up. I told Kate I thought it was contagious, and my theory had been confirmed, but instead of feeling relief, I felt worse. Knowing the truth was no help. There were no solutions, no answers, only more questions. What was it exactly? How far back did it go? And most important, was there any way to stop it? The only thing that seemed certain was that there were always 5 days between hosts, which meant I had less than 48 hours to live if the pattern held. His notes eventually became impossible to read aside from a word here or there. From what I pieced together, the whole thing became intolerable. By the final night, he wasn't sleeping at all. That's the point I'm at now as I write this. The night after the motel, I managed to get tiny pockets of sleep, but instantly I'd dream of him and wake myself laughing. Last night I didn't sleep at all. His face is superimposed over my vision at this point. The laughter softens, but it never stops long enough for me to rest. Supposedly, if you go without sleep for long enough, the brain shuts down and you die. I keep telling myself maybe I can push my body to that point and stop the chain, but I know now I'm not that strong, and judging from the motel notes, I doubt that would work anyway. This thing wants its next host. None of the news outlets had noticed the chain of deaths, so I sent what the man had found to the local paper and Kate. Maybe they'll figure out a way to end it, or at least have more empathy for the next person it claims. I wasted what little time I had left looking into anything that felt even remotely related. Schoolgirls in the Northeast who'd started laughing one day and couldn't stop. Whirling dervishes. Laughing cults. Contagious PTSD. The 1962 incident in Tanganyika. I wish I'd come here sooner. When I Googled it, this place came up as somewhere with answers no one else seems to have. I wish I'd come here sooner, if for no other reason than it's nice to have someone believe you. I didn't want to put that burden on the man's wife beyond the help she'd already given, but that meeting with her was my last moment of peace. I'm hoping someone here can help me. Because I tried 911 and they think I'm pranking them. They've threatened to send the police if I call again, and I know what happens then. So I'm turning to you, one final ditch effort before I get to that point. But I'm so tired. So very, very tired.